When we ingoma we, when we ingoma we, when we ingoma we na, when we ingoma we, when we ingoma we, when we ingoma we, unjenge ngoma ngishaya ubusuku bonke, yokwenza njani ngaphandle kwakho, unjenge ngoma wena ngishaya ubusuku bonke. Yokwenza njani ngaphandle kwakho, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma wena, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma we. Sila, sila, siphilela le ngoma. Sila, sila, siphilela le ngoma. Le ngoma, 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 le ngoma. Siphilela le ngoma. Lengoma, 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 lengoma. Unjenge ngoma wena ngishaya ubusuku bonke, yokwenza njani ngaphandle kwakho, unjenge ngoma wena ngishaya ubusuku bonke, yokwenza njani ngaphandle kwakho, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma wena, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma wena, wena uyingoma we, unjenge ngoma ngishaya ubusuku bonke, njani ngaphandle kwakho, unjenge ngoma wena ngishaya ubusuku bonke, yokwenza njani ngaphandle kwakho, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma wena, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma we, wena uyingoma wena. Sila, sila, siphilela le ngoma. Sila, sila, siphilela le ngoma. Le ngoma, 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 Kukuga satsi pega nansi patsa pat sa kukuga satsi pega yo patsa pat sa kukuga satsi pega nansi patsa pat sa kukuga satsi pega oh ay oh mama hey ay oh mama ay mama, oh ay, oh mama, oh mama. Sakut koga satsi pega nansi, patsa pat, sakut koga satsi pega yo, patsa pat, sakut koga satsi pega nansi, patsa pat, sakut koga satsi pega. Oh ay, oh mama, hey ay, oh mama, oh mama. Oh, oh, mama, sakut koga satsi pega nansi patsa pat sakut koga satsi pega yo patsa pat sakut koga satsi pega i patsa pat sakut koga satsi pega oh ay yo mama hey yo mama oh in the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. He oh, boom, boom, oh, oh, in the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. We boom, boom, boom. Sakut koga satsi pega. Ay, sakut koga satsi pega. Ay, sakut koga satsi pega. Hey, sakut koga satsi pega. Oh, ay, oh mama, oh mama. Hey, ay, oh mama, oh mama. Hey, mama. Oh, ay, oh mama, oh mama. Sakut koga satsi pega. Ay, sakut koga satsi pega. Hey, sakut koga satsi pega. Oh, ay, sakut koga satsi pega. Oh, ay, oh mama, oh mama. Hey, 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 oh mama, oh mama. Hey, oh, ay, oh mama, oh mama. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. We boom, boom, boom. Sakut koga satsi pega. Ay, sakut koga satsi pega. Hey, sakut koga satsi pega. Ay, oh, sakut koga satsi pega. Oh, ay, oh, mama, oh, mama. Ay, 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 oh, mama, oh, mama. Hey, Ay, 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 oh mama, oh mama. Sakut ko gasat si Pega. Ay, sakut ko gasat si Pega. Oh, sakut ko gasat si Pega. Ay, ay, sakut ko gasat si Pega. Oh, ay, oh mama, oh mama. Hey, hey, oh mama, oh mama. Oh, ay, oh, ay, oh mama, oh mama. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. We oh, 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 we oh, 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 in the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. We oh, 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 we sakut kuga sati pega. Ay, sakut kuga sati pega. Ay, sakut kuga sati pega. Hey, sakut kuga sati pega. Oh, ay, oh mama, oh mama. Hey, hey, oh mama, oh mama. Ay, yeah, 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 yeah. Whoa, 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 whoa. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I was told not to stand here because my head's a bit too close to. I'm going to anyway, because otherwise you can't see me. So good evening, welcome friends and colleagues and panelists and guests and partners, and I'm not sure who else is here, but hopefully the rest of you fit in that bag of general things. So welcome to the first evening of our Media Freedom Festival. We had a sensational event this morning with young people. Those of you that were here would have been blown away by the wisdom and energy and positivity that these young people have for our country. It's a good thing you're here tonight and that there'll be alcohol, because afterwards you'll probably not feel quite as optimistic, because we're looking at the question of whether or not the media will survive. Media freedom will, but maybe our media won't. So we've got a lovely panel for that. But before we do that, I've been instructed under threat of death to introduce our lovely band, who now seem to have just disappeared. They're done. They are here. Right. So I'm going to introduce our band, which will give some of our latecomers and others an opportunity to sit down. So our lovely band. Come away.
Hello, everybody. You guys look amazing, just by the way. I go by the name Elina Mandla, and I'm honored to be in your presence. And I hope you guys enjoy what we have prepared for you guys, yeah? Thank you. Shiluba Shamina Unitwisa kunanzia Danalana baby Ndakunyika inkwashushina belaka Hey sekunzi masiku Ningakuboni baby Nakushuva mino ngavuyela na baby Ndakutwisa kunanzia nikunyiketa liranzo tanaleno baby hey lokun komala unitsikala unikomala hey baby Dana babe, ndakutwisa kunanzia Dana babe, we Ndakutwisa kunanzia nikunyiketa kunanzia Dana baby, ndakutwisa kunanzia nikunyiketa liranzo nakushuva mina baby ndakutwisa kunanzia nikunyiketa liranzo baby, ndakutwisa kunanzia, Dana baby, we. Dana wena, ndakutwisa kunanzia, nikunyiketa kunanzia, Dana babe, ndakutwisa kunanzia, nikunyiketa liranzo na kushupa mina. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Media Freedom Festival 2023. I'm a little bit hesitant to stand up there. I think my heels are a little bit too high. So if you will allow me, I'm just going to make my way up on stage and take a seat. All right, so let's also give it up one more time for Elia Nomandla and her band. Thank you for opening up the second session of day one of the 3-day festival that's taking place here at the Country Club in Johannesburg. I'm Liesl Wilson. I'm going to be your host for this evening. I'm a broadcaster at the SABC, and we're looking forward to exciting, fun engagements. Earlier on, we had a session which involved the youth. We were looking at their role in this digital era. And today, we are going to look at whether we will be relevant beyond as we enter this new epoch. So without further ado, I just wanted to give a few house rules. The bathrooms are actually through this brown door over here, up the stairs. Please, no interruptions as the discussions get underway, but if you are desperate, you can make your way through over there. You also notice that everyone is wearing black, or most people are wearing black. This is ahead of Media Freedom Day, which is happening tomorrow. It coincides with Black Wednesday. So as you know, 19th of October, 1977, the apartheid regime aimed to already did ban media outlets, independent outlets. They also banned anti-apartheid groups. And so we're looking at the role that media has played from then into 2023 and beyond, how they've held government accountable, how they've held truth to power, and really what their role is going to be from here on to. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists for tonight. Perhaps before we get there, let me welcome Angie on stage. Angie, let me get your surname right. Angie Kapelianis. 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10. Angie is the SABC News Digital Audiovisual Head. Angie's going to welcome you all and give us a few opening remarks before we continue with the discussion. Okay, ad-lib. Okay, Q. Let's see my boss is in the room. All right. So we, throughout the day, have been looking at media issues. We've been looking at someone has a phone too close to the mic. Okay. We've been looking at media issues that have come to the fore and human rights issues. And throughout this 3 days, we're also going to look at ways of deepening media freedom in South Africa. South Africa is entering a rather interesting path. 2023 is just a few months away as we speak from our 2024 national elections. And South Africa as a country is at its crossroads. And so we're looking at the role that media has played 30 years into democracy, but we're also looking at how relevant it's going to be. And that's obviously going to be the topic tonight. Media freedom will survive, but will our media? Tonight's discussion is going to be robust. It's going to be engaging. We really want you to stand up and ask the questions that matter. We've got a seasoned panelists waiting for us. and they're on hand to also be part of that chat. Angie, are you ready? Okay. Did I earn my paycheck tonight? Okay. Thank you. Angie is the head of SABC News Digital Audiovisual Head, and she's just going to do a welcome and opening remark before we get on with the program. Yeah.
Is it interfering? Yes, sure, thank you. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. It feels like family because I've seen a lot of former colleagues, old colleagues. It's somebody's microphone and it's the speaker. Yeah, sorry about that. So I just wanted to say I'm truly honored to be here and to be asked to say a few words for this panel in particular. It's the first time that SABC is partnering with Media Monitoring Africa. May it be the first of many, many to come. We've had generally a very good relationship. To say to Media Monitoring Africa, happy birthday, happy 30th birthday. I think you can look back with pride. So I've kind of been at the SABC and News for 31 years, and at points I stopped counting. And that's because I really care about public broadcasting. And I've always cared about public broadcasting. Thank you. Sometimes I think I'm a little cuckoo to have stayed that long, but anyway, that's my lot in life. And I think I can look back to the early 90s and reflect on, I think William would have been one of those that government would have said was, you know, the single NGO with one laptop in those days, and how they wanted to channel money away from the NGOs. But in recent times, probably since July, I've got to know the Media Monitoring Africa team a little bit better. So we're doing a lot more things together. They came, and William and his team came to reflect and give us feedback on what we've done in the 2021 elections and 2019. We know that MMA has been monitoring us ever since the beginning of democracy, and we truly appreciate that because somebody's got to be watching, and who watches? The watchdog. And to give us, to call us out when we did wrong or when we do wrong, to praise us when we do right, literally to keep us on our toes. We also had a lovely session with Nomshado and Lister and I can't remember the other name now, forgive me, on disinformation, misinformation and malinformation. And then next month, the thing that I've been wanting for a really long time was to have training sessions on the SABC's, specifically News's editorial policy. And I briefly met George coming in here. So that's going to be fantastic. And I think that's the kind of also partnership. It's not necessarily always the big stuff. It's the conversations. When things go horribly wrong, you know, who do you reach out to? Is there like a common understanding of why we do things and why we care so much and why we should care so much about media freedom, about public broadcasting, about things like the elections, anything that makes society the democratic society that people fought for, that people died for, that people were tortured for. So these things matter to us, and it really matters that people still care. I think we can see, you know, we might not want to acknowledge it, but we can see that the country is not the country we thought it was going to be. A lot of things are falling into disrepair, rack and ruin, and I think it breaks our hearts. So if we can all, in our own little space, in our own little way, just keep things together and know that we're not alone, I think that goes a long way, especially when the dark clouds are kind of hovering. And they always tend to hover when there's elections. Watch this space. So I also just want to do, it's a day for remembering. We can go way back to the 70s and remember those that were arrested, detained, publications that were shut down. But more specifically, in preparing for this evening, I kind of reflected and remembered 4 big things of the SABC. And the one was how the SABC was the, not that I was there, but anyway, was the apartheid state-controlled broadcaster. I'd worked in Namibia and only knew a multiracial newsroom, came here and it was like so segregated and so divided, and knew that I had work ahead of me, helping, you know, trying to help get a democracy in a different way. Opening up the airwaves, telling the stories that mattered. I mean, I'll give you an example. We had probably 3 Black colleagues, and I don't like to use the color, 3 colleagues in the newsroom in 92, and they were quiet, and I didn't know what they did. And I went up to them and I said, "What do you do?" And the one guy said to me, "No, I organize the cars." So I said, "But for who do you organize the cars?" "No, for the journalists." I said, "Oh, you're not a journalist." And he kind of looked at me in a very strange way, and I said, "Come, we're going. We're going to Soweto. We're going to the East Rand. We're going." And it was, yeah, it's odd to look back and reflect on that. So occasions like this allow us to remember. 2006, the blacklisting of commentators at the SABC. 2016 was the protest ban. And then even 2021 with the elections, Patrice was here, where the ANC publicly took swipes at us and jabs at us on national TV nogal, and then wanted to blame us for losing the election, not for doing dismally badly. I think they give us too much credit. But, but it's that thing that you know, just as long as we do what we have to do, we know what journalism is, we know what matters, who paid the price for that. And then from this morning's discussion where you're the bridge, I'm the outgoing generation, we don't just do it for ourselves, we do it for the next generation. Yeah. They may not want it that way, they may have other ideas, and that's fine, that's okay. So it's like in reflecting on those things, they seem very, you know, just by the way, they were very traumatic. They hurt a lot of people. I mean, one of my colleagues died. They hurt a lot of people. There's a lot of damage that's done, but yet, you know, kick us in the face, kick us in the gut, stand up and rise, we will rise. It's tough, but that's what we'll do. So it's just good to also kind of reflect on, and then just as the public broadcaster, you know that we're struggling with funding, and it's wonderful to have these words in black and white that talk about the public mandate, and nobody, government from the public purse is not funding that. This is a conversation that should have happened 30 years ago, 27, 28, 29 years ago. There are things that we need to do. There are things that public broadcasters got wrong, and I prefer to call it the public service media because we're no longer doing broadcasting. But these things matter. And if there is no money for that, then I don't know what. Then we go into the commercial space, and I'm regarded as the hawk and the purist and don't want to go there. But these things really do matter, that there is something called the public square for the public good. And it's not commercial. And it's not only the political interference that we need to worry about, it's the commercial aspect of that. So we should be allowed to do our work with pure media freedom, but that is an ideal world. It's always going to be threatened. It's always going to be challenged. So yeah, I think that's it in a nutshell, with little opening words from me. But I just want to say thank you for having occasions like this, for bringing people together that care, for keeping these topics and issues and discussions on the agenda, on the radar all the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Ange. Thank you for those wise words. I'd now like to call upon Nomkosi Peter, the MDDA acting CEO, for her opening remarks. Sure, let me give you this mic.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity. As we celebrate the 46th anniversary of Black Wednesday, we also commemorate 100 years of radio in South Africa, and coincidentally, 20 years of the existence of the Media Development and Diversity Agency. Community media is part of the 3-tier media system within South Africa. And events such as these afford us the opportunity for collaboration between the commercial media, community media, as well as the public broadcaster. It is through strategic partnerships with reputable agencies such as MMA that we are able to contribute towards the building of a professional and credible community media sector. a media sector that is at the grassroots of communities and that has direct interface with the very communities with whom we are tasked with providing information as well as access to programs and diversity elements within as part of building social cohesion. Occasions such as this cause us to reflect on the gains that we've made, the challenges that prevail, and the role of the media as the fourth estate in the ongoing discourse around the challenges that face our country. It is therefore an opportune moment for us to reflect on the possible further partnerships that we can pursue as a collective in ensuring that all spheres of the media sector within South Africa are actively involved in providing access to information that is credible, that is timely, that is accurate, and that promotes social cohesion. I wish us all a fruitful engagement this evening, and I look forward to interacting with you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nomkosi. On behalf of the, oh, Ange, if you need your phone, it's over here. Thank you. On behalf of all our sponsors tonight, William, would you like to say a few words, or was your introduction to the band? Okay. All right. So on behalf of all our sponsors tonight, including the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany, Media Development and Diversity Agency, Media Monitoring Africa, and the SABC, that was in no particular order as well. I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's discussion. If you can please give a warm welcome to our panelists tonight. I'm going to call upon you, please come up. As I mentioned your name, I'll give a brief description about your history, your legacy. I'm going to try and encompass it in 2 sentences, and then we'll get the discussion underway. Dinesh Balia is the director of the Wits Center for Journalism. Dinesh, I've read a little bit about you. It wasn't me. Dinesh has been an academic for over 2 decades, holds a PhD in journalism and media studies, is a former deputy public advocate of the Press Council of South Africa. Welcome. Yeah. You get first dibs. Next up, Patiswa Mahobeni. She's the Chief Operations Officer at Bhekisisa Center for Health Journalism. Patiswa, mind you, is the reason why I joined the public broadcaster, and then she decided to leave. So Patiswa, welcome back home. Patiswa has been operating for 2 decades on strategic, operational, and editorial leadership roles in South Africa's media. And she's an expert in multimedia broadcasting. Currently, as I mentioned, the Chief Operations Officer at Bhekisisa Center for Health. Kate Skinner, you're up next. Kate is the director at the Association of Independent Publishers, the AIP. Kate is another, as the earlier lot called us, the outgoing generation. She's been practicing for over 2 decades as well, media freedom activist since 1994. Kate has also founded SOS, which is Save Our SABC. And that plays, obviously, as you know, a key role in policy, advocating the role in holding the public broadcaster to its mandate. So welcome, Kate. And then last but not least, Thandi Smith is currently the head of programs at Media Monitoring Africa. Thandi Smith has been at Media Monitoring Africa for well over 10 years and has a key interest in research around new media, the internet governances, and media law. Welcome, Thandi. All right, so now that we've gotten the formalities out of the way, I'm going to start with the opening question. Please feel free to answer at once, and we'll take it from there. We know that no news is bad news. In South Africa, edging closer to elections, that's obviously going to come to the fore in the way we deliver news and perhaps also play our role in democracy at 30 years in. And so the question is, which obviously forms the umbrella for tonight's discussion, is media freedom will survive, but will our media? Anyone want to take that first opening remark?
So I'll go. Yeah, can you hear me? So I think it depends on who you ask. I'm not sure this mic is working. I've got to hold it up here. All right, let me do this. I think it depends on who you ask. If you ask the youngsters that you spoke to earlier today, they'll probably say, in what form and what do you mean by media? And I think that's the way in which we need to approach it, is that we need to be open to the idea that media is going to shift and change. Platforms are going to shift and change, come and go. And the way in which we, the outgoing generation, consider what is media today is going to drastically change in the next 5 to 10 years. But yes, there is a future. Of what, I'm not sure.
All right, thank you for that optimistic outlook. Anyone else want to add on to that bandwagon?
Okay, I'm not sure.
Matisse, while you come.
Yeah, it seems like,
Yeah.
it seems like it's working. For me, it's more like, if you talk about media freedom, you're basically talking about the ability of entities to operate freely, media entities. But then you look at what is going on around and within the entities themselves. Because you can talk about media freedom, but what about freedom of expression within the media entities? And also, you can also look at professional autonomy of journalists within the entities, because that's a key issue. So it doesn't matter whether media freedom exists or survives, but how does it survive without resources? Because that's what we're facing right now. So if that media freedom is not supported with the resources that make it work, it might be as well as dead as journalism itself. But a recent question that I asked, we ran a SANEP workshop supported by the United Nations in East London, was if you were a journalist, what would be that one question or one story that you would want to cover if you didn't fear losing your job? Because the economic situation and the economic, the economics of the industry do not support free journalism and professional autonomy of journalists, because it's now controlled by what sells and what supports media entities, and not necessarily what is in the public interest and what drives human development and social progress. So there are big things that we need to deal with. Yeah.
We're definitely going to unpack that a little bit further on. Perhaps Kate, you want to
Yeah.
jump in there on the back of that?
Yeah, so I think also what's really important, coming from my sort of position, looking at local media, is that if you look at what happened over COVID, I mean, it was really devastating. So if you look at the members of the Association of Independent Publishers, which is my organization, I mean, over that period, almost 50% of those publications stopped publishing. I mean, that is a devastating number. And we looked at what we could do about that, like post-COVID. And you're absolutely right that the issue of resources is a huge issue. And what was interesting was that a lot of those publications were print publications. So the sense was, well, okay, no problem. What we need to do is we need to go online. Print is extremely expensive, but that, you know, the solution is to go online. But the problem is to go online, particularly if you're a small publication, is incredibly difficult because there is no money online. And so those are the kind of things that we as local publishers are grappling with. And the thing which I think is interesting as well, just to look at things internationally, is that you're getting all of these news deserts all around the world, and particularly in kind of small towns, rural areas, etc. And when you look at South Africa and you look at the inequalities in South Africa, you just can't allow that to happen, because, you know, it means that the kind of journalism, which is local journalism, which is often quite different from mainstream journalism, it's a kind of journalism that builds communities, or potentially, I mean, let's, you know, in an ideal world, it builds communities from the bottom up. If you don't have that kind of journalism, it means that, you know, those particular areas of the country don't have that community building or the potential for community building, and of course also holding local power brokers to account. So we have got to do something. And when I arrived at AIP, it was like sustainability. It was like the clarion call. We cannot come up with a way forward on this. Oh wow, we really are in a difficult space, and I hope that we can discuss that more in the panel.
for those sentiments. Let's give her a round of applause. Andy, what are your thoughts?
So I think that, I mean, I'm glad that Kate. That's a lot better. Thank you. So Kate, I'm glad that you sort of ended off that point talking about the move to online media, because I think that's where our kind of approach comes in that will media survive? And it's interesting that we're so confident that media freedom will survive, because for me, they're interconnected. You know, media can't survive without media freedom, but if media freedom is there, it means that there is a level of, there is some sort of media to be free in the first place. So when we grapple with the issues, looking at how media are moving online, we are seeing a whole new range of threats that come along with that. And I'm not talking about just the financial challenges or the sustainability issues, which is on the one hand, but governments across the continent and around the world also are seeing that media are moving online. And so we have seen the number of internet shutdowns that we are seeing in you know, just over the last couple of months, let alone the last sort of few years, is increasing. So what are we using to gauge, you know, media freedom? And I think that, well, just looking at the top few countries where there've been the most internet shutdowns in the world, 2 of those countries are in Africa. And then multiple internet shutdowns in the year. Just, I mean, our neighbors, you know, bringing it sort of closer to home. Eswatini, we see disruptions and shutdowns of communication channels during the recent pro-democracy protests. And so, you know, when we look at threats to media and media freedom, we need to sort of broaden the context and look at, you know, some of those bigger threats. We here in South Africa, you know, just kind of bringing it back locally, we might not struggle with the realities of internet shutdowns, but we are facing very real threats to legislation and regulations where we have government entities targeting the way that media operates. And so I think that, you know, the question of will media survive? I mean, we can't let it die. It has to survive. But, you know, like Dinesh opened with, in what kind of shape or form are we going to see that media survive? Yeah, I'll leave the other comments for the discussion.
Okay. So you've all spoken about the strides that have been taken, and then obviously also now looked at the challenges that lie ahead for us as we navigate these next few years in the industry at large. So Thandi, I'm going to pose this to you, and then anyone else who wants to jump in can follow suit. You spoke about threats to journalism. You spoke about, you know, the role of platform monopolies such as Facebook even and Google, which is something that has become an externalized threat. How would you say that is influencing the role of journalism and media in South Africa, at least?
The minute you sort of think about media and journalism and link it to platforms, you sort of lump it all together in the sense of how people consume news and media, and the algorithms and the bots and the way that news is shaped online to give you what you want to see. And I think that's something that we don't unpack often enough in these conversations, where you know, there's some real big advantages to having media online, journalism online, and you know, audience that is consuming media online, but the algorithms and the powers that dominate and shape those algorithms are in control of those narratives. And what we have seen in recent years is a complete rise of your sort of right-wing politics across social media. And that's not just one platform, that's across, you know, digital channels. And so it actually poses additional additional challenges to news and media to make sure that the content that they are producing and the content that is being shared is reaching the relevant audiences, because there's very little control in who actually sees that content once it's on the platform. And so I think that, you know, that's a whole other sort of range of threats in terms of journalists and news online. The other issue with journalists and media being very present online is the ongoing harassment that journalists are faced with on a daily basis. And that harassment is gendered, it's targeted mostly at female journalists. It's a very ugly, very, you know, I think we even classifying it as a form of sexual harassment online. And so that in itself, and we see that playing out very much in our local news industry. We've got so many examples of female journalists being targeted online, and by the very people that are supposed to be setting an example of how to engage on social media. Those in power, politicians, you know, people who should be shaping a narrative in a more positive way are the ones that are often behind the harassment and targets. So, you know, that in itself is also a direct threat to how journalists and media need to grapple with the online space and producing the changing ways that we're producing news and media.
Thank you. You've said a lot. And again, like I said, we're going to unpack it. Hopefully this is also opening and sparking more conversations amongst you all during the Q&A. But Siso, you want to answer? Sure.
Yeah, just a brief one on what, is it not working? It's working. For me, it's a brief remark to what Candace just mentioned on programming for algorithms, because that's basically what's happening now. With the diaries that are being discussed, it's what story is going to be more attractive online. It's not what stories, stories that matter. And I think one of the things that have happened with big tech and how it's changed how journalism is actually practiced. One of the things that we always have to think about, it's verification. Verification, it's a tenet of journalism. But what has happened with social, digital platforms is that you want to be fast to run whatever that's available before you verify. You will fix, it's like the old way of doing 24-hour news channels that you're not going to be wrong for long, but it's fine to be wrong. That's basically what's happening on social media. So you will go with whatever that's half-baked for as long as you know that along the line you'll change it. I think that's the biggest problem. And also the fact that we basically have to go back and think about the problem with journalists having the people that are supposed to hold you account as friends on social media. That is the biggest problem. They can't not be friends with them, but how do you then hold them accountable when you have to report on them? I think it's something that's underplayed, but it's a serious thing in terms of how you then get to do your proper journalism as a journalist when you have all these people that you're supposed to hold accountable as your friends. And I think the last one is how the cultural authority of journalism is being compromised by big tech and digital platforms, because the constitutive and informational role of journalism gets compromised because of all these associations that journalists have online and that are actually encouraged by newsrooms, because that's how you generate your followership. But what does it do to your brand of journalism as a journalist and as a news entity?
Thank you for that. Sure, Patiso, I feel like I can drop the mic now. Kate, you also want to add it on the back?
So I also think that there's something interesting. And again, I think, you know, when you look at local media and you look at the mainstream media, there are things that are different about local media. And I'm just thinking about what you're saying about the harassment issues. And it was something that I kind of really picked up on when I joined AIP, because I hadn't quite kind of got this, was the sense of like, if you live in the community and you're reporting on the community, it is incredibly difficult for you to hold people to account because, I mean, they know who you are, where you live, where your children are. And so it was very interesting because we did a survey as AIP and we asked a number of our women publishers, are you being harassed and are you feeling, anxious about kind of various harassment? And the initial response we got was like, no. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Everyone else seems to be being harassed and having a really difficult time. And then when we dug deeper, we started to realize that what had happened with a number of publishers is that they had decided that the kind of content that they were going to put out was actually going to be more lifestyle and less investigative because it was so dangerous, in fact, to actually do that kind of investigative and holding to account kind of journalism. Now, that's not to say that community media doesn't do that. I mean, we have got some absolutely sparkling examples. I mean, for instance, when we look at, who won, this latest, award, like Natnakaza Award. I mean, it was Anton van Zyl, who is one of our community journalists sitting in Limpopo, and he'd basically done some incredible investigative work in terms of the lotto. But I do think there's just something that we need to take on board in terms of being a local journalist and what that means in terms of harassment. Yeah.
I think if I could just add, I met a journalist at the Investigative Journalism Conference in Sweden recently who said that he no longer uses his byline simply for security reasons. And because he has to operate online, he cannot leave a digital trail because of the global kind of information warfare that's happening. His monitoring is ongoing and so on and so forth. So his name is not in the public domain. He does investigative reporting, but he has erased that personality from the internet. And that's how he's managing to do his work.
And so on the back of those concerns you've mentioned, how do we buffer against this corrosive commercial logic that has pervaded the space in media?
Sounds
like a
I just
thesis
kind of
question.
I want to throw out there that lights don't put food on the journalist table. I think that's an important thing to put out there, that journalists are entitled to be paid and to be paid well. With very many other soft skills as it's seen, like nursing and teaching, we have this tendency to say that we should be passionate about it and therefore we shouldn't aspire to other things, greater things, kids going to better schools and so on and so forth. And I think that's a story that we need to leave behind. Journalists need to be compensated properly and adequately, and particularly because they work under such conditions now. It's far more onerous for a journalist to operate now than it's ever been in the world, anywhere in the world, whether it's local, national, and so on and so forth. So I would like to divorce the kind of commercial aspect from the commercial pressures, because what Patisa was saying earlier is that we may have a free landscape in which to operate, but many of our journalists are not independent from their own owners, from their own managers. We've seen it in newsrooms where editorials are, regularly captured actually by owners. Those narratives are not free to operate. And so freedom and independence have to go hand in hand, but we still have to pay those people to do it.
And so just to say that, I mean, I think the thing which is interesting, I mean, again, kind of coming into to local media, there was a sense of like, I'd be sort of more purist, if I could put it that way, in terms of saying, we must be absolutely certain that, commercial pressures, don't influence the kind of way that we actually report on things and the kind of, kind of stories we pick, et cetera. And yet when you're in the local media environment, you realize that we desperately need money. And in fact, what's quite interesting, for instance, is, we had this kind of view of like, all of these different organizations, whether they're government or corporates, like sending us press statements and basically saying, can you cover these press statements? And then, when I was talking to my members, they were basically saying, well, please don't send us press statements. No, you are expecting us to cover all of this news. Where are we going to get the money to cover all of this news? Please, we actually need advertorials. Can you put advertorials into our publications so that we actually get some funding into the publications? And so when you talk about independence in that way, it's not about independence from commercial pressures. It's like, can we get a whole lot of money into the publication for various different sources? And then we can be independent, but I mean, it's so interesting because I mean, I would also have said corrosive commercial impact. I'm like, commercial, please come. We desperately need you. Can you come and support us? But can you do it in a way where we can still report on things in a way that is you know, holding people to account, doing that deep investigative journalism. But we need to be very aware of the fact that funding has to come into the publications. And so it is a bit of a different environment, and it's much more complex and much more tricky than I could ever have imagined when you're kind of outside it. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. So I think that something we tend to forget when we're not in the middle of being a journalist or running a news entity is that news at the end of the day is a business, and it is run as a business. And something that came up in previous discussions during the course of the day was the issue around credibility. And news, if you think that news isn't going to be, is subjective on some sort of level, I mean, then I think the view of news is wrong. There's always going to be some kind of influence somewhere along the line, but it's about that level of credibility, transparency, and accountability that media have that sets media apart from those who are just sharing information and for the sake of it, or getting into the realms of disinformation. What sets news media apart is the credibility issue. And the more credibility that a news entity has, and the credibility comes from, as I said, the transparency around, you know, who's paying for what, who funds what, whose interests are being served, you know, that the elements that go into the credibility issue. But as long as there is that level of accountability, which we in South Africa and our news media environment, we do have a really great level of accountability through our self-regulatory mechanisms, like the Press Council, BCCSA, and so forth. But it's almost like we want to try and defend the fact that media need to make money. But I think it's so important to highlight that media need to pay the people who produce the journalism. Otherwise, media will die if we don't have journalists.
And it's not just about producing the work and paying work. You know, media in this country, particularly at this point, is having to deal with litigation on an ongoing basis. Nobody comes into a business thinking, I'm going to have to, you know, bring in lawyers on a regular basis just to do the work that we're wanting to do.
Yeah, I actually think that one of the things that we need to interrogate as the media is that we hold this view that news media is a business. And on the other hand, we talk about a public good. So which is which? It can't be both. So if we are to reconcile the social mission of journalism and the commercial imperatives, where do we draw the line? And something that I still find peculiar is how the advertising sector deals with what they consider unbankable audiences, despite the fact that they're in huge numbers. If you look at the radio platforms that are run by the public broadcaster, and you look at Ukhozi has up to around 7 million listeners. And then you can look at other radio stations that are owned, and then you look at regional stations that are commercial, and how those regional stations are making more money than the 7 million listeners that are sitting on Ukhozi and other stations that have 5 and other numbers. So what is the problem with advertising? Because the reality is, it's not just about the fact that marketers have migrated to online platforms. There is still money that's being made on regional commercial radio platforms. Where does it come from that audiences that are sitting on African languages stations are not bankable? Because that's one thing that we need to address. If there are stigmas and ways of viewing those audiences as not commercializable, where does that come from and how do we deal with it?
Absolutely. So that's about challenging the commercial logic that we've alluded to. Patty, so it's also about getting to the root cause of capitalism, which is, I mean, if we can't ignore that elephant in the room. That's also the modus operandi.
And in fact, the people who listen to those radio stations are big consumers of these middle to high-end brands. So at what point do they become not bankable?
Absolutely. Perhaps the audience wants to pick up on that and we can take that further with the Q&A. I want to look at South Africa edging closer to elections next year, so in just a few months' time. And given where we find ourselves as a country, given the role of media in South Africa, what reimagining needs to take place? Do we need to rework the social contract we have in place? What are some of the public alternatives you envision? Let's dream a little bit big here. What do you foresee? I really want you to answer that. I can give you two alternatives that I advocate for. Okay, so I think we should have a journalism trust. I think that's something that could help. And I also think we should have public ownership, because then they would be interested in what's coming to the fore. That's just my reimagining. You take it from here.
But we have the SABC, that is public ownership. No, that's terrible. I mean, in an ideal world, it would be so nice to to not have to worry about the very real strategic disinformation campaigns that are going to plague our social media platforms. It would be fantastic if journalists could go and engage and interrogate and unpack political party manifestos and political party positions. It would be fantastic if, you know, as an industry, as the public, we understood what the changes to the Electoral Amendment Acts actually mean, and to be able to, you know, see a sort of reinvigorated voting public who want to, because of the fantastic work that media is doing, want to go out and vote. But it is an ideal world. So, you know, I think that as you're talking about elections, I think we can't talk about the upcoming election period without talking about the very real issues of disinformation and how we are already seeing politicians and political parties campaigning on social media. But I think what we need to also see happen is that politicians need to behave responsibly on social media. It's the amount of content that you see from these accounts that are supposed to be from these politicians is just horrifically disgusting. We're seeing xenophobic content being, you know, disseminated from Action SA and, you know, Patriotic Alliance, and they're not being held accountable for that. And I think that, you know, media are going to have to sort of step it up when it comes to holding politicians accountable during this period. I'm going to take the opportunity with the mic and just sell MMA a little bit. But, you know, we are, during Media Freedom Festival, launching 3 incredible platforms. Well, relaunching one of them. Most of you hopefully would have heard about Real 411. But we're relaunching for our new election period for 2024, which is really exciting. But we also are launching a new platform called Mars. And it's called Mars because it's the media attack reporting system, which is going to be a incredible platform where journalists can go and report, or anyone can go and report instances of harassment of a journalist on this platform, and civil society and with our partners will be able to take action against that. And so we are thinking bigger picture around, well, how do we combat some of these issues in this space? And the last one, which we haven't touched on at all, but just because it's within the 3 key platforms, is a platform called Padre, which is the political ad repository. And here, what we're doing is we are looking at the transparency around political ad funding, as well as being able to identify credible political party ads versus the manipulated content that we're going to see coming out from those who are wanting to discredit other political parties. So I think that we're heading for an election period, an unprecedented election period, both for the voting public and as well as for media. Media have an unbelievable challenge ahead of themselves to be able to report on accurately with that same level of quality that we expect from the incredible journalists that we do have. But it's going to be a very challenging time. Sorry, I know I took far longer, but I really wanted to say that.
Yeah. For me, if you look at the fact that this is going to be a serious one with the coming election. There's a lot at stake from a political perspective, and it's going to have an impact on how media entities cover the story of elections. I mean, this is now South Africa celebrating or marking its 30 years of democracy. And there's a lot of examination that needs to be done by media houses as to how did we get where we are and what has happened along the way. And this is what causes discomfort where politicians are concerned, and media houses should actually do their job. If there's one thing that I've always said is that any attempts to censor media houses, censorship is repulsive and it is despicable. And you can't negotiate that with anyone. In fact, I recall one call that came that said, you see, the elders are unhappy with you. It's like, elders, no, I deal with newsmakers in the newsroom. I don't deal with elders. And that's how it works. So one of the things that we probably need to do, and it's late at this point, but it's something that we could have done earlier, to build a strong social compact with the public. And that we have not done, because the public, as beneficiaries of the social dividend that journalism delivers, they should be able to defend journalism. But it's not the case because we don't have that strong relationship with the public that we serve. One of the things that we need to tell politicians is that it is not the job of journalists to keep parties in power, to put them in power and to remove them in power. It's the responsibility of the electorate. And if they can get that right, I think we will get somewhere. But I know it's a sore point for them the minute you start talking about the responsibility of journalism to the public and not to politicians. It's for the governed, not the governors.
Like, okay.
So just quickly just to say again, and I mean, one of the things that I'm worried about just in terms of local journalism is that I think that a lot of people won't be voting because I think that they have a sense of like, actually, why should we? And how's it going to change anything? And that kind of worries me a lot. And I think that, you know, the kind of journalism that we've seen kind of during elections is, you know, very much linked to particular people and not to policies. And yet, how do you make policies interesting? And I'm, you know, the thing is, I'm thinking about particularly, you know, like our members. I mean, it's really hard to take, you know, a whole lot of policies and, you know, digest it in a way that's going to be interesting, particularly when a lot of the publications are actually more lifestyle type publications. So there's a real challenge out there. And yet I think it's absolutely critical that our publications, you know, rise to the occasion around this. And so for me, the thing is that, and as you're saying, it's quite late in the day, but it's about saying what we need to do is a lot of training, a lot of thinking around that election coverage. And it is different for local media than from national media. But these are national elections. So that also is an interesting issue in terms of how we cover things. So for me, there's kind of a lot more questions than any real answers. Yeah.
So I think I have three things that I would have as the pie in the sky kind of ideas. And one of those is journalism cohesion. So a better kind of sense of a single industry as opposed to enemies in the industry. I think we shoot each other down far too much. And in that way, it almost feels like a massacre in front of the public where we're, you know, looking at each other rather than looking at the work that we're doing and should be doing. Transparent private sector funding and more support actually as we go into the election time, because we're not going to get that money anywhere else to do that work. And finally, better prepared journalists who can ask those questions. You don't get any other time in this country's history than an election when politicians want to court journalists. That is the best time to go in with those critical questions about issues that are underreported, under-asked, that you don't get responses to on a regular basis. I think we spend far too much kind of amplifying what they say in these public events, but we don't go in with those critical questions because we're not ready for it. We're simply not prepared, and we spend far too much time thinking about the election itself and not looking at the context.
Let's give it up for our panelists. So this was a scene setter, some opening questions. I'm sure it sparked more questions on your end. So we're looking forward to engaging with you as well. Anyone who wants to pose a question to the panelists, please could you stand up, address yourself, your name, who you represent, and then you can pose the question. Perhaps also mention who you'd like to answer it. Thank you. Hasina.
SABC. Sorry about that. Oh, SABC News. So the one question that came up was around media censorship specifically, but I'm more interested in, are we new types of media censorship? There's just refusing, having a ban on a specific.
Thank you. Perhaps we could take 3 questions at a time and then we can have them answer and go back. The gentleman with the hat at the back.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Giscard Mwama. I'm from Scout Media. It's a PR and media company in Johannesburg. So I just have a questions before we go to the elections. I think I wrote something when the panelist was giving a note here. Oh yeah, so number one, we did a bit of a survey around Braamfontein.
Yeah, it'll help you a little. There we go.
Yeah, so we did a bit of a survey. Can you hear me now?
Yes, just not too close to your mouth.
This way.
Yeah, there we
Oh
go.
yeah, so I was saying we did a bit of a survey around Braamfontein, around vets as well, the students of, I think, Boston College. I mean, how do you call the college again? Close to vets? Rosebank College, yes. So we're asking the students, where do you watch the news? How do you consume news? We ended up finding out these guys do not even watch SABC News. That's one. And then we ask them, okay, but there are issues in the country you need to know about. You need to know what is happening around you, like current affairs. They say no, they'll watch most of the news online. Some get the news on Twitter, even podcast or on trends. That's if you go to Twitter, it's the current trend where they get their news. So I want to ask maybe a question just to find out, do you think the media is evolving according to generations? Because your baby boomers are not really a fan of social media, but we're seeing the generation Y, like your millennials are more into your podcast, Twitters, and social media. So the question is on the panelists, do you think our media is evolving according to generations? And then if our media will survive, are you guys taking into considerations the podcast? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Another question? The gentleman with the voice from earlier. Just listen to him. What is your name? Who are you representing? And then please pose your question.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sinemi Boyombulu, also known
I
as
told you.
also known as Sine, the voice artist. I worked with one of the SABC's PBS radio stations as the station voice. And so much pressure on me, Izo, but I'll try and ask my question. Just to add on to the gentleman's question here, I just wanted to know then, where does the credibility of news outlets stand if, you know, media continues to evolve throughout these generations, if there is a rapid growth of, you know, newer platforms of news consumption, where does the credibility of traditional media outlets stand? Does it mean it's in danger? Does it mean you guys can maybe uphold it? How are you planning to uphold the credibility of traditional media outlets? Thanks.
All right, thanks, Sine. All right, so those are the three questions. Are they clear? Do you want me to rehash them? Okay.
There's another one.
Yeah.
Last one.
The last one first, okay. Sine,
start
the
with-
role of tradition,
Yes.
credibility of traditional news outlets and where we stand.
Yeah, I want to start with that one. And I'm gonna go to the Rosebank College Vets question as well. I think one thing that we shouldn't miss is that journalism conventions are not changing with technology.
Yeah.
Technology is about access to the content, but the production conventions of news content have not changed. So if the principle of truth and that journalism's first obligation is to the truth, and that journalism's first loyalty is to the citizens, that is not going to change, regardless of where you consume your news content or where it sits. And there's always an advantage if you look for branded news content, because you know that that's verified information versus what is circulated on social media that has no origin and you can't attribute to anyone. So there's value in branded news content, particularly where traditional platforms are concerned and how they actually evolve beyond traditional platforms to online content. Their content remains trusted. And in fact, South Africa still stands in a good position where trust is concerned. If you look at the Reuters digital news report that came out recently. So it is not much of an issue for as long as we don't abandon the conventions of journalism. To the question that has been asked about whether there's an evolution towards generational preferences. I think one of the things that have happened is that, and I want to make reference to the SABC because that's where the question came from. The fact that the people who have been surveyed say that they don't consume news content that's produced by the SABC, it's actually a good thing for them. It's a good thing for them. Because when we say as the SABC, you find our content everywhere, anywhere, anytime. It means that we don't confine you to television and radio. You can go to digital platforms and find your content. So it's a good thing for them. And also the fact that, which is the problematic side of how things have always been done, this could be applicable to other news media. One thing that that keeps bothering me and this is at a personal level, is when there are discussions about what strategies should be in place for the SABC and its news division get sustainable. For me, it's not about the consideration of strategies at this point. It's about going back and review the purpose of existence of the public broadcaster. It's about that. Because if you look at the tenets and the principles of why it exists, they're actually taken from what happened in 2022 at the BBC. 20 years later, the SABC is still sticking to educate, inform, and entertain, exactly how Reed conceptualized the principles of the BBC. The BBC is sitting in a different economic context. South Africa is a completely different economic context as a developing nation. Are those principles adequate to serve the interests of the country? So before you even get to the level of considering the strategy, you need to think about how elastic is what is called the public mandate, because when the education, entertain, inform principles were conceptualized by Reed for the BBC, it was for a single language. We took that as is imported into South Africa. We have a multicultural environment, different linguistic communities that South Africa has to serve. So if you're going to think about how elastic it is and how expansive that mandate is, you're going to have to think differently about how you're going to fund the SABC. So those are the things that we need to consider when we talk about how news is provided to the different linguistic communities, because it's not just the fact that you have youth that says we're not going to consume or we prefer not to consume SABC news content. It's also about the different linguistic communities that are not being served properly. They're not being served properly because you have, I mean, you have communities that have news content from Monday to Friday on alternate days. On weekends, it's like those communities are dead. There's nothing that's happening in the country until next Monday.
Yes.
Why are we still in that sport when we have all these digital platforms that are supposed to provide content to these communities? But also bearing in mind that you have people who are sitting in the periphery of society who actually have, they have to choose between buying data and buying a loaf of bread. So while we talk about evolution of the media, we mustn't leave behind the majority of the citizens who actually can't access that information.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anyone want to answer on the back? Those are valid points. Anyone want to jump in on the back of that? Perhaps also speak to the question of Asina, where she was speaking about new censorship ways in less apparent ways, rather. So less apparent ways of censorship beyond what we're seeing at this point. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, so I just want to jump on what Patricia was saying about kind of African language content, and I mean it's such an important issue, because if you look at the media, basically other than the SABC and a little bit of community radio, I mean it's in English and a little bit of Afrikaans and a little bit of isiZulu, but it really does not cover all the 11 official languages. Hence the incredible importance of community media, because the SABC has this important mandate, but it can't do it alone. And it needs to then have all of this other media, the community radio and community print and online, to come into that space. And I think that that's what is really scary at the moment, because if you look at community radio, I mean, a lot of those stations are now, because of Centec issues, they're actually closing down. I mean, with a lot of our publications, I mean, it's incredibly difficult to go online, yet print is extremely expensive. And yet it's so interesting. If you look at like, what is the most popular content in the country? By miles, it's African language content. I mean, Uzalo is by miles the most popular. I mean, if you look at Ukhozi FM, as you were saying, the 7 million listenership, I mean, it's so we really have to deal with issues around language. And I like what you say so much about, on the digital platforms, it's got to be all the 11 official languages. And somehow either we do have to try and get these advertisers in to realize there are huge audiences out there. And that they do need to support that. But it's not only those, advertisers, corporates, but it's also donors, it's government, it's all of those to kind of ensure that sustainability. Yeah, thank you.
So I was going to talk about something else, but I'll just add on to this point that, and I hate floating our boat, but we have a program at the Wits Center for Journalism called the Citizen Justice Network. And what it does is we focus on training paralegals who are equipped in local languages to talk to communities about their rights and responsibilities, and particularly where there are public service mishaps. We then have community engagements where those paralegals work with communities, pair them up with local community radio stations. And through those engagements, actual real-time on-the-ground engagements, we produce podcast content. That podcast content is then syndicated to community stations in those languages across the country for free. So it's one way of taking one engagement and making it more accessible to people instead of thinking of one device, one person, one data, one person, and so on and so forth, because we still have communities who have nothing, but need that information. So there are models of working in ways that we can reach more people without kind of, stretching ourselves or ensuring that we have a journalist in every community. I'm seeing more and more requests from local communities who have individuals who are passionate about media, who realize that there's a need to tell those stories, and who are not journalists, but they're they're community activists, and they want to use journalism to amplify the voices of their people. And that's an opportunity that's completely missed in South Africa at this point. We're just, moving along, evolutionizing our media and so on and so forth. That's the wrong word, but don't use that. My 15-year-old is sitting there, bad language. And instead, we're forgetting about the people that actually should have been captured in 1994 by the 3 tiers of broadcasting, by all of these things, the MDDA and so forth. These are things that we need to be doing actively and working away from this dominant model of shaping media. I'm going to speak to Hasina's point very quickly about algorithms. I'm sorry to say this is a stark point, but there's very little we can do about that. And there's very little that we can do about that simply because these are private companies who are protected by private company laws and regulation. We're seeing also, I think a couple of weeks ago, Google shut down analytics, right? Which means that more and more that data is becoming inaccessible to the bulk of us. To those of us who want it, we cannot get it. And until states start to think about these companies differently, we have no chance. We're going to be mediated by these companies who are leveraging off our data at the end of the day. We fed this machine, and the machine is now biting back, unfortunately.
Anyone else want to pick up on the back of the responses from the panelists? I see 3 hands up over there. The lady, okay, the gentleman standing up, and then you can just pass the mic to the lady in front of you.
I'm sorry to jump in. Can I just answer the question of the voice? The Voice of Radio, I can't remember which radio station. You were talking about this. No, you were talking about credibility. It's the other young man who spoke about young people in the news. We have a saying that young people don't look for the news anymore, but they get news, right? So what we know as news and how it's packaged, and it speaks to my earlier point that what young people are doing, and I don't know those of you who may be on TikTok, I'm not, but I've seen it elsewhere, where other people are reporting on the news that's reported.
Yeah.
So it's like this unboxing stuff, right? Look at me, I'm now opening this. So what they're doing is they're grabbing news. They're grabbing news from all over the place, and they themselves are doing a report, right? They're framing it, they're representing, and so on and so forth. So they're doing what the journalists are doing, but they're curating content from all over the place. And most often, they're curating it from news agencies. So that is an example of news that's accessible to younger people, the stuff that they want to watch. And yet many of us in this room are very uncomfortable with that idea. Let's be honest. Thank you.
Yes, please go ahead, sir.
Good evening. Hello?
If you can project it, it can also work.
Hello?
Thanks.
Hello? Okay. Good evening. My name is Thabo Tsulo. Thank you for inviting me. I'm here representing the ex-owner drivers from ABI and SAB Miller. I'd like to give you summary of what happened to us as the ex-owner drivers of ABI and SAB Miller. Those 2 big corporates, they destroyed our manhood. They destroyed our families in front of media. Media were there on protest. You could see all those guys who were having cameras. When we spoke to them, they turned cameras from us. The question that I used to ask them, who's funding you as a media company? Because we're supposed to be independent. When we protest about the atrocities that these two big corporates done to us, whoever wants to ask me more questions, I'm prepared to give the full information of all the atrocities that was done to us by these big corporates. To all provinces, I'm talking about, we've got 9 provinces in South Africa.
Thabo,
So-
thank you. Thank you for that, Dinesh. wants
Yeah,
to jump
I
in
mean,
there.
I think we've heard about these stories. There was a little bit of coverage a couple of years ago and we've let go of it actually. And I think maybe Ahmed, you might be interested in having a chat. There's a long history and lots of context here to this story.
Okay, Thabo, Ahmed is sitting in front over here. Ahmed, you just indicate who you are. All right, so you can discuss a little later. Thank you. Thank you, Thabo. Anyone else want to ask a question? Oh, there was actually the lady just in front. Yes. Thank you, Nomshada.
Hi, thank you. My name's Asra. I'm with the SABC. There's something that I think sometimes we might be losing track of, or that as somebody who's been involved in the news worries me very much. And I think I'm picking up from what Dinesh left off when she spoke about it in her earlier answer. And it's the idea of media literacy or literacy generally in our country. Patiswa referred to Ukhozi FM having so many million listeners, but 10 years or 15 years ago, they had double that amount of listeners. They had over 15 million listeners. In fact, I think at their highest point, they probably had something like 18 million listeners. I mean, I think we can say the same just about every single, I don't want to say credible, but media platform across the country. Kate spoke earlier about print media as well. And for me, I think that is a bigger concern, that our consumers are actually more interested in hearing what is happening or hearing a view of their favorite celebrities than looking at credible news sources, like somebody else pointed out. And that for me is a much bigger problem, because we can all be surviving. We can get people to pay or invest in what we want to put out as journalists. But if our audiences are not taking us seriously, and if they are not investing in the product that we are selling, then no, we're not going to survive at all.
Thank you, Asra, for that. We'll make a note of that point as well. I think one more question for this round, and then we'll pick up after that. Nomshada, you can choose.
Yeah. Okay, so my question is around, I've seen recently that
Yes.
So I think just a follow-up to her question, does that pose threat to journalism? And if so, what can be the measures that are taken to counteract that, and to also make sure that, you know, the public see the value of journalism versus the narrative that political parties are pushing for themselves on those platforms?
Thank you, Mashatsi. I'm told that we're going to wrap up soon, so perhaps we could take about 2-3 more questions, and then we can continue the conversation on social media using the hashtag MFF 2023 or during dinner a little later. Okay, we'll extend it to 4 and then we'll cut it. Angie will be the last. So Lerato, it'll be you, and then the gentleman at the back. It'll be you, sir, after Lerato, and then there were 2 other, and then Angie will end off. Okay, and then the lady behind Lerato.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lerato. I'm a social media lawyer. And I just had a comment based on what the lady was saying about social media platforms. I think as the media is evolving, we're relying too much on social media platforms and we're putting too much emphasis on them. Although we're saying that we're moving with the times, but X can close tomorrow, Facebook can close tomorrow. What happens to the news? A lot of kids this morning were also talking about how they're getting news from social media platforms. But if you look at X, for example, now you can pay to prioritize your content. That is very dangerous, especially if you're looking at elections coming up. These political parties can actually pay. And the more money they put in, the more social media platforms like X make more money, but the more engagement and impression they get for the users. So unless, news companies want to invest more money in those platforms, they're not going to get the engagement and the impressions that they wanted. So that was my comment.
Thank you. Point taken. Sir, behind, yeah.
Thanks very much. My name is Sean. I'm academic. I just want to give a slightly different perspective. I know there's a lot of media people here. But I want to come back to the point that was made about the social compact with society and the role of the media. And I think that's important, but also for a different perspective, which is like the narrative that one hears here. And in a lot of these kinds of fora, it's kind of like, things are sort of okay in the media. The problem is like up there. It's the commercial, it's the political pressure, it's with the algorithms and so on. But I think there are reasons for the public distrust the media. I think there are media houses that have very clear biases. We have serious concentration of media. There's the Naspers Media Group, there's Arena. Then you've got the SABC, which hopefully would be impartial. I'm not convinced it's actually as impartial as it should be, and I'm actually not convinced that the biases that people think are in the SABC public broadcaster are what the narrative suggests they are. But I guess I won't go into that yet. But I think there needs to be a little bit greater reflection on the culpability of the media. Okay, and I'll give a specific example. So somebody was talking about the need, I think it was Dinesh, about the need for journalists to be prepared when it comes to dealing with politicians. And that the reason that there isn't good enough questioning is just they're not prepared. But some of the reason there isn't good enough questioning is because particular media houses have certain agendas. And a specific example, which I'm going to give, is Rise and Zanzibar, which is getting a large amount of media coverage for unclear reasons, because they have no demonstrated support base. Some people are speculating it's because the leader of that party is a journalist. I don't think that's actually the reason. I think there are other reasons. Okay? But the obvious question that's not being asked is, where is this party getting its funding from? Because that's what makes the difference. There are lots of people who want to be politicians and stuff, but they don't have the money. There are many interviews that have been done, but that question has not been asked, or it's not been satisfactorily answered. Right? Now, the ANC would not get away with that kind of thing. Okay, they have to declare their funding under the laws and so forth. But even then, you've got organizations like Amabungane, you've got Daily Maverick, who are all over ANC funding, and rightly so. Okay, but the point is, if you ignore those issues when it comes to some political groupings, then your credibility is going to come into question, and reasonably so. So in the lead up to the elections, I think these kinds of things are also important. While I'm sympathetic to everything else that's been read.
Yeah, thank you, Sean.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mpumi Mbete, and I'm glad I went after you, Sean, because I just realized I've worked for all of those houses you mentioned, from the SABC to Arena and previously Naspers. I'm a journalist, but when the lady touched on media literacy, I've always been concerned about media literacy from young people's perspective, because the very first time I was introduced to how editing happens, I was straight out of varsity and my jaw dropped, because I was at a shoot where we filmed an interview for about 2 hours. I won't mention it, still trying to keep jobs. But 3 minutes of it was shown. And the 3 minute that was shown was so specific that it lost all of the things that I had heard in the 2 hours. And the people that are consuming this were not there. And it must be true. It was on TV. I saw it. It must have happened. But where the camera focuses and what was left out left me in shock. So media literacy is one thing at a school level, another at a community. And while with SABC, I was with an African language station. It's a different community altogether. There's nuances and layers there that are not covered in mainstream, unfortunately. Colleagues, I understand I'm amongst journalists, I'm a journalist. The one thing that I feel has not been touched today, and I hope we can get into it, is we're heroized. I don't know the English word. I know the Swati word. But we've elevated journalists as if they are without bias, even within the newsrooms, which I can safely say now they're not there. At editor's level, some stories don't get covered because the editor has a problem with the MEC in that province or their own biases. And I don't know how we can protect the credibility of journalism if internally the journalists are gatekeepers of what does make it.
Okay, don't try to, what it looks like, Angie's allowing you to speak before she wraps up.
Okay. Cool. Thanks very much. I'm a journalist at East Africa. Just an initial point earlier on the training of journalists and the elections. I think a big challenge which we want to face as young journalists coming in, perhaps the availability of resources and also doing more with less. So now as a journalist, you're shooting, you need to do your social media, more often than not, sometimes you're shooting yourself, going back to the office, filing, editing. So you become the one-stop shop for all of it. And that becomes a bigger challenge when you're trying to do the longer format and ahead of elections, you kind of need to focus on today's story, getting that out, and then also worrying about the elections, which will come along next year as well. And then just also speaking to social media, this is more an opinion or a question. I think a lot more around using social media for us, platforms such as TikTok, such as Instagram Reels, such as Facebook. I think there needs to be specific strategy for that in newsrooms. Dinesh, you mentioned that, you don't engage with TikTok. If we are going to get our news and get to the electorate who will be perhaps voting in their first elections, their social media platforms would be TikToks, would be Instagram Reels. So I think having that specialization and that strategy within editorial level would be exceptionally important. I think, having a young person in an editorial meeting is something that really should be pushed towards, and perhaps even curating content specifically. I think, with all due respect to social media editors in our newsrooms, the main focus is perhaps repurposing on-air content for YouTube, for Twitter, and for Facebook, which will more often than not just get, ideally get a few shares or a few likes, depending on who you're interviewing. But having a specific strategy, perhaps even shooting in the 9x16 rather than the 16:9 platform, would actually then go out on your socials a lot more. And hopefully with the attention span, which many of our young people do have, I speak for myself as well, that 50 or 60-second clip, why not have it short, sweet and short pieces of content, which can hopefully go forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay. There were a lot of questions. I hope you took notes because it seems like people want answers. I don't know where you'd like to start actually, but please, whoever wants to start.
So we all just take one.
Sure.
So let me start with, or let me just touch on Azra's question on media literacy and what consumers want. I think it's an issue that, affects all of us and it's concerning. But what we've lost is the ability to distinguish between the public interest and what the public is interested in. We have a very specific mandate. If you ask a kid if they want to go to school for 12 years and be educated, which kid is going to say yes?
Yeah.
But that's in their interest and it's for us to do that for them. So we've got to find that balance between what it is that interests people and what it is that we have to do as part of this public mandate that we have as journalists. Can I go on the second one?
Sure.
No, I don't want to anymore. I forgot.
All right, I can remind you.
I don't know what I wrote.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
So actually, I do have a point about it. So I think you're absolutely right that platforms will come and go. But what I think is the next big war in the world is actually the battle of the internet and who will control the internet. And once we get to that point, actually, we're all going to be screwed. You know, we need to be very vigilant about that. And media literacy plays a huge part in making sure that we have active citizens who can protect the internet moving forward. For far too long, and it comes from the history of the internet, actually, where there was a sense of a creative commons that was being created. That's been hijacked, and it's been hijacked a long time ago. And we don't actively confront that. What we are seeing is that social media platforms who are, you know, the big dragons in all of this, but beyond that are states, and states who control and attempting now to control more and more of the internet and how we get access to it on a regular basis. So I think the media literacy aspect plays a huge part in making sure that we can protect the internet as a public good, as it should be globally.
Thank you. Hatisoy?
I think I want to add to what Dinesh has said about I think it's a response to Azra and Mahlatse about the public not necessarily consuming the content that we produce. And in fact, it came out in the Reuters digital news report. News avoidance is becoming a big issue for all media across the globe. And these are questions that we should ask ourselves as to why is the public avoiding the content that we produce? And we think one of the things that have happened is there was a time when we saw ourselves as authority in delivering information to the public. This time around, we need to stop looking from the supply side of news content and look at the demand side of the news content. What is the public looking for? And not what we can deliver as news media. Because one of the problems is centered around producing content that's not necessarily relevant, and that's not necessarily what the public wants. So we need to think around those issues. So it's now supply versus demand. It's no longer just supply that will give you, and you sit there and watch our content or listen to our content. And there was a question around the killing of stories in newsrooms. It is a big issue. And it's, I think one of the problems that I've come to, I'm grappling with this, because what we have as agencies that are supposed to be watchdogs of the news media, your self-regulatory mechanism being the PCSA and BCCSA, those platforms will not address anything that has to do with censorship, because they only deal with defective reporting when it has happened. So journalists and editors have nowhere to go to report censorship. There is no such entity. There's no such platform where journalists can go and say, my professional autonomy is being interfered with. And therefore I need protection, or I want this addressed. There's no such platform in the country. And I think it's something that we need to look at. And some countries actually have audience councils that inform how media entities get to do their work, and we have not. We rely on editorial policies and we rely on other mechanisms, but we don't have members of the public that form councils that actually actively engage with the work of these media entities. And the last one is to the training of journalists ahead of elections. I think one of the biggest problems that we have, particularly where African languages are concerned, is that the base medium for instruction and the base medium for training of journalists remains English. You don't see any coverage, live coverage of isiZulu or isiXhosa out in the field. It's going to be a reporter that was meant to go and cover an English story who comes and translates the original version that was produced in English. That is hugely problematic. It's even worse where you look at your African languages desks, where you have producers who don't necessarily go out to the field. They rely on the English copy that gets provided to them. In most cases, these are not trained journalists. Two, they are not certified translators. So you have a cocktail of a mess in those desks where you actually need to provide the kind of, it's like rudimentary training on what it means to be a journalist and what it means to be a translator, because you are not a certified translator. You get appointed on the basis of proficiency in the mother tongue that you translate. So it is a problem. So it's not just the training for elections for general reporters. It's paying particular attention to African languages desks, where the training is actually going to determine the quality of the content that the public gets.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those raw facts.
Yeah, great. So just a couple of, I mean, fantastic questions. Wow. You know, they really, really get you to think. So I just wanted to particularly touch on the kind of the distrust of the media and the fact that we actually have to take that very seriously. And that, you know, and just that really, you know, interesting statistic about like, you know, how the media audiences are actually dropping. You know, I mean, what you were sort of saying, you know, about like Ukhozi, like it used to be 18 million odd, and we're like, wow, there's 7 million, you know. So I think the thing that we've got to look at, I mean, we've got to attack this on like multiple kind of levels. And I do think you're right that one of the things which is really powerful about the media, which isn't there in social media, is the fact that, you know, we should be trustworthy and that we go through a process of looking at our facts and verifying our facts. And so what I want to say is there are a couple of things. I mean, that media literacy, I think, is absolutely critical. I think generally people have no idea how the media goes about its process of collecting facts, verifying facts, and putting that out and being transparent about the process around the collection of facts and the writing of stories and the producing of content is absolutely essential. That's the one thing. The second thing I think is also really important is like, who are these journalists? And I have noticed that, you know, certain platforms do this where they actually explain, Kate Skinner worked for blah, 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 and then she moved and she worked for blah, blah, blah. And then there's a sense of like, okay, so I've got a sense that Kate has this particular background and therefore probably has a bit of a bias here and there. But at least I know it, at least it's transparent. And I think that kind of thing is really, really important. And then there's two other things I just want to very quickly touch on. And it was something when we went on this big sort of trip, you know, a whole lot of our journalists to kind of look internationally what was happening and where journalism was kind of moving. And there were two things that came up about the kind of journalism that was really useful for local journalism in particular. Explainer journalism, like explaining like why and how something works and not having a sense, and even just with the elections, how do these elections work? Again and again and again, explaining that. And then the other thing, which I think deals with the sense that people, and I think the Reuters report talked about this a lot, the sense of the depression around watching the news. And I mean, I know that myself as an absolute news junkie. I'm like, I can't. I like literally now that we have now this whole new, you know, Hamas issue, I'm like it's too much. And so there is also the sense of solutions journalism. And that was something that came out as a big, big issue, particularly with local journalism, is that you do look at the problem, but then you start to unpack what could be potentially done about it. And I think that we as journalists need to constantly innovate around the way we do our journalism. And back to your audience issue, what do audiences want to, if audiences are saying they're getting too depressed and they feel that the situation is hopeless, okay, what are we gonna do then in terms of giving them a sense of like, actually, there's something you can do. And so, yeah, only one with it.
Thank you. Sandy, would you like to wrap up? Any question that stood out in particular for you?
I think that hello, hi. I think that some of the questions could, some of the people posing the questions could have actually been on the panel. Yeah, some really thought-provoking comments that have come out, and what a rich important discussion as well. I think for me, I just want to touch on, again, it has been mentioned, but the absolute importance of media literacy, but not just media literacy, media and digital literacy. And when we talk about digital literacy, not just literacy around using the internet and navigating yourself through the online space, but literacy around infrastructure literacy. I think we often tend to forget that, again, we're having this conversation around online media, online spaces, social media, news online, but we still have a big percentage of the population that are not as accessible or don't have as much access to the online spaces as we tend to think. And not only just access, but the costs of data, like I think it was Patrice who mentioned choosing between data and bread. That's a very real reality for a lot of the population. But we at MMA take this so seriously as well. We've been working with children and media literacy and running initiatives and projects, programs for the last 20 years. And the way that we have seen the change and the shaping of media literacy and the impact that it has on children's lives is unbelievable. And over the last few years, that's shaped into media and digital literacy. So, you know, I think that we need to be doing a lot more, getting these literacy programs in school curriculums. But, you know, on the flip side of that, we also as an organization are busy fighting for access to internet in schools, which it feels like you're having conversations on two completely different, you know, societies. But we're talking about, you know, just in around the corner in downtown Joburg, CBD, one of the most urbanized areas, you have primary schools that are still not connected to the internet, who don't enjoy that access. So I think just when we're talking about media and digital literacy, we need to talk about it in a holistic kind of way where we talk about infrastructure literacy, device literacy, and the real big issues of access to information. Then just to sort of touch on some of the other issues, you know, the whole argument or the whole debate around, you know, trying to understand what audience needs and meeting them where they're at, you know, I do agree with, but I also think that this might not be a very popular opinion, but we also need to make sure that we give the audiences what they need as well. And it's that balance between what's interesting to the public or what's in the public interest. And often the public don't know what they need. And especially around an election period. You know, journalists do, at the end of the day, hold that space where media does drive the narrative around this. And to be able to unpack and offer and really just go back to the basics, you know, pictures, infographics of electoral processes. And there was a comment around politicians and promoting their own content online. Yeah, I don't think any politician should be let loose on social media, but the reality is that they are. And so it just comes back to the very big need for ensuring that you can trust the credibility of mainstream media. The public broadcaster, the need for the public broadcaster is more than ever before. We have to make sure that the public broadcaster is sustainable and is funded correctly and adequately to make sure that we have that media to go back to. You know, just reflecting on the conversation around this issue of podcasts. and you know, my fellow panelists have touched on it and unpacked it really well, but just because you have access to a podcast does not make you a journalist. You know, it's one thing to share information online and to share opinion and to share your thoughts, which I think is fantastic. You know, the fact that we can communicate and we've got these tools to do so, but don't, you know, cloud it in something that it's not. You know, yes, journalists have their challenges. Media has their challenges. We all know that media really stuff up sometimes, but it's about the accountability and the mechanisms in place to rectify things when mistakes are made. And trust in media, yes, it is a problem, but so is trust in public institutions generally across the board. And I think that speaks to a far bigger issue. Media is not the only industry that is suffering around public trust. And so I think that there are far more questions to be answered than what we've touched on this evening. But I think, yeah, if we can just think about those points in closing.
Perhaps this served as a conversation starter And again, there are more questions than answers. So we'll keep that conversation going. It sounds like there's a lot of unlearning, relearning, learning that needs to happen, lifelong learning. And I know that everyone here in this room is dedicated to that. So while we're trying to spotlight on the current state of media freedom in South Africa, the challenges, the strides and progress that has been taken, we also need to look at ways of deepening media freedom in South Africa, perhaps 30 years into democracy and beyond as we edge closer to elections. So thank you to you all for participating. Thank you to our panelists. I'm now going to call upon Nomshado, who's going to give the closing remarks. Thereafter, dinner will be served. Thank you.
I hope me standing here doesn't bother everyone. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, as we draw close to this thought-provoking and I think quite robust conversation that I have ever been part of talking about media freedom, and truly our powerhouse woman-led panel and facilitator. I mean, wow. Not only did you give us insights that we should go back home and ponder on, but I think you actually ignited something that we felt throughout the room, and that is passion towards our media and ensuring sustainability and ensuring that we are serving the community that we are here to serve. But most importantly as well, I'd like to thank our partners. We are here as a team, the German Embassy, SABC, MDDA. I'll use Lizel's word in no particular order. You're all special. But if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here having these conversations. And obviously, this is just the beginning. I think we set the tone in the morning. We set the tone even further today because we set the scene for the rest of the festival. So my job is clearly just to give you a highlight of what you can expect tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. We're looking at AI, right? Yes. AI, but what do we mean AI and how do we look at it when we're talking about freedom of expression, digital media, hate speech, incitement, etc. So that's quite exciting because that's actually a workshop. So you'll have two brilliant facilitators that you can actually probe questions to and engage. And in the evening, we're looking at one topic that I think arose even in the morning and today as well, online harms in the lead up to elections. And it's quite a diverse panel where we've got the IEC, we've got Jean Leroux, who's coming in from a very practical perspective of dealing with digital harms. We've got MMA, and as well, we've got Lisa Rappel, who's joining us, by the way, internationally. So we're not only going to have a local perspective, but also an international perspective. Friday, our last day, is ending in quite an informal way. We're tackling two big topics. That is hate speech, and at the same time, whistleblowing. And why I say it's informal is because this is a format that will allow you as an audience to take part and see how journalists and other experts actually think when it comes to scenarios. So in the morning, we've got hate speech workshop led by MMA facilitators. And then thereafter, we've got Break the Hate. We've got journalists and legal experts coming together, teaming together to see who will, at the end of the day, survive the rope. At the end, we've got, would you blow the whistle? Not only do we ever shine a spotlight on whistleblowing and the issues that are there, but once again, you've got an opportunity as the audience to engage with those experts on that day. So I truly hope that I do see these faces again tomorrow and Friday, because we are ending with a cocktail party to thank you for all the effort we all know is during the week for coming here and probing the questions that you did today. Can you please give yourself a round of applause? All right. I'm not going to hold us. We've got amazing drinks. We've got dinner waiting for you. And I really hope the conversation that was started here continues as we are talking and conversating with each other. I know we've got a last item from our band. They really want to leave us with a bang. They did wait for this moment, this shining moment. So please bear with us and let's show them some love. I mean, they really are amazing. So I'm going to give it up to you. And I'm going to thank our panel, our facilitator. You've been with us since the morning. You've been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. Yay. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
No shadow. Yes, there you go.
Then how long is this set?